The night was heavy, pressing against the bus windows like an unseen hand. I drove the dead route, tires whispering across cracked asphalt, the street lights flickering as if warning me to turn back. The clock on the dashboard blinked midnight, and the world outside had vanished. Empty streets, shuttered shops. The kind of silence that drags at your bones. I glanced into the rearview mirror. The seats were empty. Yet, with each stop, the doors snapped open and closed on their own, like invisible passengers insisting I keep moving. My heartbeat caught in my throat as the cold hum of the engine seemed to whisper secrets I wasn't ready to hear. Somewhere in the shadows I felt eyes, though the bus held no one. Something had boarded. Something that wasn't supposed to be there, and it was testing the edges of my sanity, one eerie stop at a time. I had passed the last living neighborhood miles ago. Only skeletal trees and abandoned storefronts remained, their dark windows staring like empty sockets. The doors slammed shut again behind me, making me jump. I told myself it was the wind, the old mechanics of the bus, anything but what I truly feared. That I was no longer alone. Each stop felt like a dare, a countdown to something inevitable, and with every snap of the doors, I could feel the weight of unseen eyes, riding silently, whispering threats that only the dark understood. My heart raced, and I realized that the bus, this cursed vehicle, had become a vessel for something older than the streets themselves. The radio crackled, though no station had been selected. Static hissed like a distant scream, wrapping the bus in a sound I couldn't ignore. I reached to turn it off, but the dial wouldn't budge. Words, half-formed and incomprehensible, hissed from the speakers, and for a moment I could swear the air itself was speaking my name. My palms were clammy, the wheel slippery beneath my grip. Somewhere in the darkness outside, something moved, keeping pace with the bus. I knew in the deepest marrow of my bones that I was being followed, not by another car, not by a living soul, but by the impossible, the silent passengers who only existed to haunt me. I pulled up to a familiar stop, one I'd seen 100 times during the day. Nothing was there, no sign of life, no hint that anyone had ever waited. Yet the doors opened anyway, a creaking groan that seemed to echo into the void. I dared to look behind me. Empty seats, cold and silent, but I felt them. A presence, thick and watching, almost breathing against my neck. The air inside the bus had grown colder, heavy with the weight of things unseen. Panic clawed at my chest, but my hands moved mechanically, driving forward as if the bus had its own will, and I was merely a passenger in a nightmare I could not escape. Somewhere in the darkness, a faint tapping began, metal on metal, rhythmic and patient. It came from the rear of the bus, soft but unmistakable. I stopped breathing, listening as my own heartbeat became a drum in my ears. The doors slammed again, and I turned too quickly, expecting a figure. Nothing. Only the shadows shifting in impossible angles, seats bending as though something invisible had seated itself. I realized then that the bus wasn't just haunted. It was alive, aware, and it fed on the terror of the one person foolish enough to drive its route at midnight. And as I gripped the wheel, I understood the cruel truth. Tonight, I was never going to make it home. I drove on, headlights cutting through the thickening fog, each street stranger than the last. The bus seemed to breathe, the engine sighing in rhythm with my racing pulse. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. Certain someone, or something, was moving just beyond perception. Shadows twisted across the empty seats, as if the dark itself had taken form. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white, and I realized the stops were no longer just locations. They were thresholds. With every slam of the doors, the boundary between the world I knew and whatever haunted this route thinned, teasing me with the impossible and dragging me closer to a reality I couldn't escape. The streetlights flickered as if warning me to stop, but the bus had its own intent. I passed familiar landmarks warped into unfamiliar forms by the darkness. Each turn brought a sensation of being watched from all angles, though the bus remained empty. A low hum reverberated through the metal frame, and I could swear it was forming words, beckoning me deeper into a night that had no end. My heart raced, and the wind whispered through cracked windows, carrying voices just beyond comprehension, coaxing me to acknowledge the presence that refused to reveal itself fully. At an abandoned corner stop, I hesitated. The doors creaked open, slower this time, almost deliberate. I leaned forward, staring into the darkness where no one should have been, and felt a chill crawl up my spine. The hum of the engine became a heartbeat, synchronized with mine, echoing in the empty metal shell of the bus. The night seemed infinite, swallowing every echo of the city, leaving only the bus, me, and the unseen that rode silently with me, testing my courage and sanity in equal measure. I saw it then, or thought I did. A fleeting reflection in the side mirror, a figure seated where no one could sit. My stomach dropped. The bus shuddered as if acknowledging its passenger, the doors whispering shut without my touch. I tried to rationalize it. A trick of the lights, a reflection of the street lamps, but the sensation of being observed persisted, heavier now, intimate and invasive. I realized that no rational thought could untangle the web of this night. I was trapped on a path dictated not by roads, but by the desires of something far older and colder than I could comprehend. The tapping returned. Louder now, like knuckles rapping on metal, echoing through the cabin. I dared a glance over my shoulder. Nothing. Yet the sound persisted, moving in rhythm with my pulse. The doors slammed open once more, inviting me to step beyond reason. I swallowed hard, trying to keep the engine running, trying to escape the sensation that the bus had grown sentient, that it was aware of my fear, that it delighted in prolonging my torment. Somewhere in the darkness, the unseen passengers were waiting, patient and merciless. And I knew that the night had only just begun. The bus rattled along cracked roads, its engine groaning like a wounded animal, and I could feel the presence closing in. The rear-view mirror no longer reflected empty seats, but shadows writhing in impossible shapes. My hands shook, but I refused to slow, as though any hesitation would invite the unseen to take control entirely. Each streetlight I passed flickered like a warning, and the fog thickened, curling around the tires and the undercarriage, whispering secrets I could not comprehend. I realized with a shudder that I was no longer driving the bus. It was driving me, guiding me through a night stitched from fear itself. I reached a bridge spanning the river, the only structure still intact in the crumbling city. The reflection of the bus in the water below flickered unnaturally, stretching and warping as if mocking reality itself. The doors opened again, and I glimpsed something. A pale, indistinct figure seated silently, staring through the fog with hollow eyes. I slammed my hands on the wheel, heart hammering, but the bus did not obey. It hummed and pulsed with life, carrying me toward an unseen destination. The city had vanished behind me. There was no turning back, only forward into the growing nightmare. A sudden gust of wind slammed the doors shut with a deafening clang, and I heard whispers rising from the floorboards. The temperature inside the bus plummeted, my breath visible in the dim light. The seats seemed to twist and bend around unseen forms, and I could swear I felt fingertips brush against my shoulder. Panic clawed at my chest as I forced myself to keep moving, gripping the wheel like a lifeline. Somewhere behind me, the tapping grew louder, insistent, demanding recognition. I understood then. The passengers weren't invisible because they wanted to hide. They were waiting for me to acknowledge their presence, their dominance over this cursed vehicle. I approached a roundabout, and the cityscape seemed to loop impossibly, streets folding back on themselves, The bus slowed, though I hadn't touched the brakes, and a cold laughter seemed to echo from the seats. My pulse raced as I caught fleeting glimpses of figures seated in patterns I couldn't understand. Their hollow eyes followed me, demanding attention, asserting control. I slammed the horn, hoping to wake myself from this nightmare, but the sound echoed hollowly, absorbed by the darkness outside. It was no dream. It was real. And the bus was alive with something older, crueler, and far more patient than I could have imagined. The tapping transformed into knocking, rhythmic and deliberate, as if the bus itself was announcing my failure to obey. I dared not look behind me anymore, afraid to see more than the shadows could hold. The fog pressed against the windows, condensing into ghostly shapes that seemed almost human. The engine stuttered, then roared, the dashboard, lights flickering wildly. I realized that I had crossed a line. There was no returning to the world I knew. The passengers had claimed me. The bus was no longer a vehicle. It was a predator, and I was its prey, trapped in an endless midnight that demanded my submission. The bus took a sharp turn on its own, the tires screeching against the asphalt, and I realized my hands were no longer guiding it. They were passengers too. Outside, the streets had become alien, buildings warped and leaning at impossible angles. The fog thickened into a choking wall that pressed against the windows, carrying whispers that pierced my ears. I could feel the air vibrating with intent, as if the bus itself was alive, and every creak and groan of the frame was a heartbeat echoing through the night. I gripped the wheel desperately, knowing I was no longer the driver, but a captive in a vehicle that had chosen its own path. The tapping turned into scratching, like nails raking across metal, coming from the rear of the bus. I dared a glance back and saw the empty seats pulse as if breathing. Shadows coalesced into vague humanoid forms, flickering in and out of existence. My heart slammed against my chest, and I could feel the weight of countless eyes observing me. The bus seemed to feed off my fear. Every movement of the steering wheel met with a mechanical shiver. The doors opening and closing like a predator's jaws. I understood now that nothing on this route was meant to leave unscathed. I was a pawn in a night that had no dawn. A bridge of broken streetlights appeared ahead, a path lined with darkness so thick it seemed tangible. I forced myself to keep moving, though the bus trembled beneath me. The whispers grew louder, forming words I couldn't decipher, taunting and coaxing me forward. Every reflection in the windows showed distorted versions of myself, eyes wide with fear, hands shaking, trapped in a loop I couldn't escape. The bus doors slammed with a ferocity that rattled the frame, demanding I continue, dragging me deeper into a nightmare stitched from fog and shadow, a place where the impossible had become my reality. The tapping became a chorus, echoing from every corner, every seat, every inch of the metal frame. The bus seemed alive, bending subtly as if breathing, the floorboards vibrating beneath my feet. I looked into the rearview mirror, expecting to see nothing, but rows of pale, indistinct faces stared back at me. I could feel their gaze burning through me, demanding acknowledgement. My hands shook violently, but the bus obeyed a rhythm I could not influence. Somewhere in the darkness outside, a shadow moved in perfect synchrony, as if guiding this unholy machine along a path I dared not resist. I approached a tunnel, its entrance yawning like the mouth of some colossal creature. The darkness within was absolute, swallowing the headlights and the fog alike. The doors slammed one final time, and I felt a presence settle beside me, heavy and suffocating. The engine groaned, responding to a will not my own. I realized then that the bus had chosen its destination, a place beyond the city, beyond reason. The tapping, the whispers, the shadows, all of it had led here. I was no longer driving. I was being carried, willingly or not, into a void where the midnight route had no end, and the passengers, whatever they were, had claimed me completely. The tunnel swallowed us whole, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. The headlights illuminated nothing but a wall of black, and I could hear the whispers more clearly, taunting, coaxing, threatening. The doors thudded open and closed on their own, a rhythm that synchronized with my heartbeat, faster and faster until panic became a living entity in the cabin. I realized the bus was no longer a machine. It was an extension of the dark, a conduit for something ancient, aware, and relentless. I gripped the wheel, but my hands were weightless, almost as if I existed only as an observer to its movements, carried forward by a force beyond comprehension. The walls of the tunnel seemed to pulse, breathing in sync with the engine. Shadows on the seats grew more defined, forming grotesque shapes that twisted and recoiled, reaching toward me with impossible angles. I felt fingers brush my neck, cold and heavy, though the bus remained empty. My pulse slammed like a drum in my ears, and I knew the route had ceased to be a road. It was a living maze, constructed to strip me of reason and will. Every instinct screamed to stop, to turn back, but the bus ignored me, carrying me toward an inevitable climax I could neither predict nor escape. A sudden jolt threw me forward, and the engine roared, louder than any machine had a right to. The shadows shifted, coalescing into humanoid forms with hollow eyes that bore into mine. Their faces were pale, indistinct, yet horrifyingly human. I slammed my hands on the wheel, trying to wrest control, but it was gone. The bus accelerated of its own accord. The road outside warped into twisting impossibilities. I realized I had entered a dimension of the route itself, a place stitched from fear and shadow, where the passengers were no longer invisible. They were tangible, relentless, and infinite. I screamed, but the sound was absorbed by the metal frame and swallowed by darkness. The seats began to pulse and shift, bending like living things, while the fog thickened into solid shapes that clawed at the edges of perception. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rear window, distorted, terrified, unrecognizable. The bus hummed, a vibration that resonated through my bones, and the whispers became a chant, an incantation I could feel in my chest. I realized that the bus had been waiting for me all along, and the route had been alive, feeding on fear, shaping me into something that would never leave its midnight grasp. The tunnel ended abruptly, opening onto a street that was both familiar and impossibly wrong. Buildings leaned at insane angles, shadows stretched to impossible lengths, and the fog clung to the bus like a living thing. The doors slammed one last time, trapping me inside with the unseen passengers who had claimed me. The engine purred like a satisfied predator, and I understood with cold clarity that this night would never end. I was no longer a driver. I was part of the route, a permanent inhabitant of a midnight world that existed solely to torment and devour anyone foolish enough to take its wheel. The street ahead twisted like a reflection in a broken mirror, pavement bending impossibly under the wheels. I tried to slow, but the bus ignored my commands, surging forward with a life of its own. The shadows in the seats moved independently now, whispering my name, calling me into their darkness. My chest burned with panic, and my eyes darted frantically from rearview mirror to road ahead. Each flicker of the overhead lights revealed new shapes, more defined than before, pressing closer, as though the bus had become a cage alive with unseen predators, and I was its only meal. The air thickened with cold, and my breath came in jagged gasps. The dashboard flickered wildly, lights illuminating the contours of faces that weren't there before, pale, hollow-eyed, and impossible. I felt a weight on my shoulder, a presence pressing into me, though the seat beside me was empty. The bus hummed with malevolent intent, vibrating as if aware of my terror. I realized I was no longer fighting to drive. I was fighting to survive the relentless sentience that had claimed this vehicle, and by extension, me. The bus surged onto a bridge that didn't exist on any map, the cityscape outside folding into impossible geometry. I could hear voices chanting in a rhythm that synchronized with the slamming of the doors. The seats leaned and twisted, pressing inward as if attempting to crush me. I felt the cold, deliberate weight of unseen hands on the wheel, guiding me forward. Panic threatened to consume me, but amidst the chaos, I glimpsed a thought, perhaps a way to survive. But acting on it meant submitting to the bus entirely, surrendering what little control I had left to escape its grasp. I slammed the horn, screamed, pounded the dashboard, but the bus did not respond to my will. It obeyed its own. The shadows coalesced fully, forming indistinct humanoid silhouettes that shifted with fluid motion, bending the air and fog around them. The temperature dropped sharply. Frost formed along the windows. My reflection stared back from the rearview mirror, twisted and terrified, a warning I couldn't heed. I realized the bus was not just a vehicle or a trap. It was an entity, feeding off fear, feeding off me, and the night was far from over. I had only seconds to choose between resistance and total surrender. The final street stretched infinitely before me, lined with darkness that seemed to hum with intent. The bus accelerated, doors slamming in a relentless rhythm, shadows twisting violently in the cabin. My hands trembled, every nerve screaming to escape. But the vehicle had already decided my fate. I realized the truth. There was no escape from the midnight route. It had claimed me, body and mind, transforming me into a passenger in my own nightmare. The fog, the shadows, the impossible streets. They all converged into one overwhelming certainty. I would never leave this bus, and the passengers would never let me go. The city outside had vanished entirely, replaced by a void of shifting shadows and fog that swallowed light and sound. The bus moved of its own accord, doors snapping violently, pulsating as if breathing. I gripped the wheel, my fingers raw and trembling, but it was futile. The whispers had become a roar, voices chanting in a language older than the streets themselves. The shadows in the seats leaned closer, their hollow eyes fixated on me. And I understood with a final, bone-deep certainty that the bus had chosen me completely. I was no longer a driver. I was its prisoner, a permanent passenger on a route that had no end. The road ahead fractured into impossible geometry, spiraling and twisting into shapes I couldn't comprehend. The bus surged forward as though guided by unseen hands, doors slamming open and closed with rhythmic cruelty. I could see glimpses of other drivers, other passengers lost to this route, trapped in their own nightmares. The bus hummed with satisfaction, vibrating through my bones, and I felt my resistance fading. The entity that had possessed this vehicle was patient, eternal, and indifferent to my fear. I realized there was no choice left, only submission to the will of the midnight route. I felt the presence beside me now, tangible and suffocating, pressing against my chest as if merging with me. The shadows in the seats stretched toward me, their forms writhing and pulsing with life. I tried to scream, to resist, but no sound escaped. The bus had become my world, and the world beyond had ceased to exist. Every stop, every slam of the doors, every whisper and scratch had been a prelude to this moment. I understood then that the midnight route was not a place. It was a state of being, and I had crossed fully into its realm. The fog consumed the final traces of the world outside. The bus moved forward, unstoppable, carrying me through darkness that stretched infinitely. I was no longer a man but part of the machine, a fragment of fear and motion entwined with steel and shadow. The whispers had become my own thoughts, inseparable from my consciousness. I realized that the midnight route was eternal, a loop of dread and silence, and that the passengers, the invisible, impossible passengers, were everywhere, watching, waiting, feeding. I had become one of them, a permanent inhabitant of the night, a prisoner of the wheels and the fog. The bus continued on its endless route, wheels humming over a road that did not exist, through streets that twisted impossibly in the fog. I stared ahead, empty eyes reflecting the glow of the dashboard, and understood that I would never leave. The doors slammed with the precision of a heartbeat, carrying me forward, forever a passenger in a nightmare with no end. The midnight route had claimed me completely. The driver was gone, and only the bus remained. Alive, eternal, and hungry for the next soul foolish enough to take the wheel. The night stretched on infinitely, and I was trapped, part of its dark rhythm, forever bound to a road that had no dawn.